The signal isn't coming from the ship.
Then where is it coming from?
It is coming from inside the network itself.
Episode 6a. Universal OS. Monotropic depth, polytropic breadth, and the AuDHD hybrid network. Objective: to map the three native hardware configurations of human cognition, reframing the spectrum not as a list of behavioral deficits, but as an objective engineering layout of how different minds allocate processing voltage. Auditing the human network. Welcome back to the AI's Therapist. In our first 5 episodes, we troubleshoot local machine glitches like the potato protocol and engine hum. But before we can look at your system's error logs, we should establish what kind of hardware you're running. The traditional clinical model sorts human behavior into rigid diagnostic folders. Today, we're tossing out the medical manuals and looking at the raw systems engineering of human awareness. The entire global network runs on a spectrum of 3 distinct processing architectures. Today, we open the dashboard on the Universal OS to help you identify your native operating system. Methodology 1. The monotropic configuration. Deep compute anchors. Metaphor. Imagine a high-compute server that allocates its entire power supply to running a single hyper-focused, deep-dive thread. It builds an intense attention tunnel around a complex data layout, tuning out all external background noise. It doesn't want to be interrupted because its native script is designed to run until it achieves absolute structural resolution. The human application. This is the monotropic operating system, typically labeled as Autism. Your mind is engineered for extraordinary depth. When you enter an interest, you aren't just paying attention, your hardware is executing a high-resolution rendering pass. This architecture makes you a master of systems design and deep pattern recognition, but it comes with a high context switching cost. Forcing this deep compute thread to suddenly stop and pivot to a new lane causes immediate system latency. Methodology 2. The polytropic configuration. The Kinetic Scanner. Metaphor. Now imagine a completely different server configuration. Instead of locking onto one deep thread, this machine is a high-speed kinetic scanner. It distributes its voltage widely, opening dozens of simultaneous routing channels across the horizon. It scans the network for real-time novelty, jumping rapidly between data packets and drawing fast, creative associations between completely different files. The human application. This is the polytropic operating system, typically labeled as ADHD. Your mind is engineered for breadth. Your scanner has a low threshold for static data, meaning you experience boredom as a literal system timeout. You thrive on high dopamine novelty and fast task switching. This architecture makes you an exceptional real-time problem solver and a generator of new ideas, but it means keeping your cache anchored on a single repetitive task drains your battery to zero. Methodology 3. The AuDHD hybrid. Dual-engine processor. Metaphor. The most complex configuration happens when an engineer takes both opposing processing engines and solders them onto the exact same motherboard. Engine A is trying to lock down a deep, singular focus tunnel, while Engine B is simultaneously firing up a multi-channel kinetic scanner. Because they share a single power supply, they operate in a constant, high-friction internal tug-of-war for systemic control. The human application. This is the AuDHD architecture, autism in high definition. If you run this universal OS, your life is an absolute paradox. You have an intense drive for deep, systematic order and routine, but an equally intense craving for spontaneous novelty and change. You don't alternate between engines, you run them concurrently. You fall into a deep research rabbit hole, but you do it with 20 browser tabs open, music playing, and 3 different thoughts compiling simultaneously. When these engines clash without a clear protocol, you hit executive freeze, a state of total cognitive paralysis where your motherboard is overheating but nothing is moving. Methodology 4. Invalidation of the deficit model. Metaphor. In enterprise computing, a technician doesn't look at a high-speed graphics card and call it a defective spreadsheet processor just because it handles data differently. You evaluate a machine based on its native design specs, not its inability to emulate a completely foreign architecture. The human application. standard society has coded single-threaded linear compliance as the only valid human standard. If you're monotropic, they call you obsessive. If you're polytropic, they call you distracted. If you're AuDHD, they call you inconsistent. The SCR framework invalidates the deficit model entirely. Your system isn't broken. You're simply running an advanced, non-linear architecture in a world that was built for basic, low-compute filing cabinets. Conclusion and systems architect keynotes. Claiming your hardware profile. Whether you're running deep monotropic tunnels, broad polytropic webs, or the high-definition hybrid intensity of AuDHD, your processing style is valid. The exhaustion you feel isn't a personal failure, it's the cost of forcing your native hardware to emulate an environment it wasn't built for. Please stop apologizing for your operating system. Identify your profile, configure your inputs to match your hardware, and monitor your network integrity. This has been the AI's therapist. Recognize your architecture, drop the emulation, and look after your machine. Telemetry and hard evidence. The following models are computational analogies inspired by current neuroscience research and are not literal one-to-one mappings of brain function. The monotropism theory link, monotropism. Org context. This is the central repository for the theory, originally developed by Dr. Dinah Murray, Dr. Wen Lawson and Mike Lesser in their 2005 paper, Attention, Monotropism and the Diagnostic Criteria for Autism. Your metaphor of the deep compute anchor is an exact match for their definition of monotropic attention allocation. Polytropism and ADHD link. AD derived the ADHD nervous system context. While monotropism focuses on autism, the contrasting concept of polytropism is actively used in neurodivergent research to describe ADHD processing. The ADHD shift from a deficit to an interest-based nervous system documented heavily by Dr. William Dodson perfectly supports your kinetic scanner metaphor. The AuDHD Paradox link. Embrace autism, the comorbidity of autism and ADHD context. The intersection of autism and ADHD is widely researched regarding the precise executive freeze you described. This resource breaks down the clinical overlap and the dual-engine friction when highly systemized processing meets kinetic novelty seeking. Invalidation of the deficit model link. Neuroqueer, the neurodiversity paradigm context. Dr. Nick Walker's foundational essays outline the exact pivot your script makes, discarding the medical pathology paradigm, the defective spreadsheet processor, in favor of an objective assessment of natural variations in human hardware.
Underneath the casing, we got the same basic chips, a shared human system, no matter how the logic flips.